Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glow, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Aren't you sick and tired of the same old politicians being in Washington, D.C. year in, year out, year in, year out? Same face, same politician, doing the same thing, doing the same business, getting the same results for your district, for the region, for the state, for the nation. Isn't it time for a change? Folks, listen, if a United States congressman has been in office after more than 12 years, it's time to bring that man or that woman home and elect somebody new. If a United States senator has been in office for 18 years, it's time to bring that man or that woman home, elect somebody new. We only allow the President of the United States to serve 8 years. We allow a congressman to serve up to 12 years, that's enough. We allow a United States senator to serve up to 18 years, that's long enough. We do not need to continue to send these people back year in, year out to be a part of the good old Boys and Girls Club in Washington, D.C. We need to enforce strict term limits for these politicians. We should not send someone to Washington, D.C. to spend the rest of his life, to stay there in D.C., here in D.C., where he totally becomes oblivious to really what's going on in the district and in the region. Let's work to keep our freedom. We're not maintaining our freedom by electing the same person for 25 or 30 years to service in Washington, D.C. That's not keeping our freedom. Keeping our freedom is sending new voices, new faces with fresh ideas, progressive, fresh ideas to Washington, D.C. Let's work together to change this law and allow our senators and our congressmen to come home after 12 or 18 years. Let's bring about change in D.C. Let's begin now to enforce strict term limits on our politicians in D.C. A lot of our congressmen and senators like to brag about how long they've been in Washington, D.C. They say, well, I've been here 20 years and I'm a part of this club and I'm a part of this committee and I'm a part of this organization and I have helped start this many nonprofit organizations, or I'm the chairperson, chairman, chairwoman of this committee, and they like to brag about that. After a while, it starts to be a little bit embarrassing, though, because they've been in Washington, D.C. for 15 years or 20 years or 30 years, and roads back home are falling apart. apart, and bridges back home are crumbling, and people back home are starving to death, and people back in their district or their region are on food stamps, Medicaid, and trying to figure out how they can survive on disabled Social Security, while you have the congressman or the United States senator in Washington, D.C., he's making $170,000 or $180,000 per year, plus all the perks that they get by with in Washington, D.C., and yet they brag about, well, I'm the chairperson of this committee, and if you elect me and keep me elected, I have all this clout in Washington, D.C. Look how far I've arrived. Look how far I've come. Look how much I have attained in Washington, D.C. And they beat their chest and say, oh, I'm really an important man or really an important person. I can get all this for my district. I can get all this for my region. And yet we say that and we say, okay, we elect them, and then we elect them again, and then we elect them again, and then we elect them again. And it's just the same old garbage year in and year out. Employment doesn't change back home. Manufacturing does not move into the district. New businesses are not started. People are still hungry. People can't get off their feet. People can't buy a new house. People cannot hardly survive. And yet you have the same Congress people, the same United States senators, the same politicians, the same old faces that you're putting there year in, year out. We do it year in, year out. We buy the lie. We keep putting them there and nothing changes. Friends, it's time for us to enforce term limits on United States Congress people, on United States senators. We do it for the United States President, 8 years, and you're done. 12 years and you should be done as a congressman. 18 years and you should be done as a United States senator. We should be sick and tired of hearing all of this rhetoric year in and year out. I'm the chairperson of this, I'm the chairperson of that. Look at all of this clout that I have in D.C., and yet back home people are hungry. Back home people can't buy a house. Back home people can't afford to send their kids to college. Back home people can't afford to go to the doctor. Back home people can't afford a prescription. Medical care just gets higher. College education continues to get higher. The cost of living just continues to be higher. People can't afford to go to the grocery store, and yet we continue to hear the same old rhetoric year in, year out. Every election, it's the same old thing. We elect the same old people and we get the same old results. Friends, let's vote them out. Vote these people out and elect some new faces. It's time for new blood in Washington, D.C. If they've been there more than 12 years as a congressman or 18 years as a United States senator, it's time to vote those people out. Vote somebody in with a fresh face, fresh ideas, with some progressive ideas to help our country. Folks, our country needs help. Our country is not doing so great. Our country is in economic decline. People are suffering in our nation. There's as much poverty, really more poverty, right now than there's ever been before in our country. It's time for us to join our hands together and really do something right for this country. Let's enforce strict term limits. Let's begin to vote some of these people out. Let's vote some new people in, get this country going in an upward direction, a right direction for a change. Don't you get sick and tired of hearing about radical Islam? Don't you get sick and tired of hearing about what radical Islam wants to do to the Christian people in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan? Radical Islam is on a tremendous move, killing people, killing Christians, martyring Christian people. And we just sort of blow that off. We blow it off that there might be a possibility of radical Islam moving in the United States, or that a radical religious group might be behind terrorism or wanting to murder or execute people here in our country. Friends, we need to hold our heads up. We need to have our eyes open. We need to be very aware that there is a mentality. There is a group of people that wants to defy all the freedoms that we have here in the United States. They want to shut down our freedom. They want to tape up the mouths of our women. They want to come in and burn down the churches, the Christian churches in America. They'd love to take over this country. Now, friends, I'm all for the freedom for those who are members of Islam to worship freely here in our country, just as I am for the Baptists and the Methodists and the Catholics and those who are of the Hindu religion to have freedom to worship in our country. any group that is so radical and so extreme, though, that they want to hurt people, that they want to hurt men or women or people of color or little children, or they want to execute people because of their faith, or just execute people because of a political persuasion or a political opinion that they have, or because they voiced an opinion. No, that kind of an extremism has to go. We must not tolerate that kind of extremism in our country. This is a country of freedom. This is a country founded on the principles of freedom, to be able to state our opinion, to be able to vote, to be able to worship freely, to be able to move about the country freely without persecution or oppression. We do not want America to become a land of Sharia law. We do not want the United States to be a land of radical Islam or any kind of radical religious extremist point of view that is on the move to dominate and hurt people. That's not what America is about. America is about freedom of religion, freedom of church, freedom to preach the gospel, freedom to preach any religion if it does not hurt or oppress or persecute or try to execute other people. We must have that freedom to worship and to preach freely and talk freely and speak freely here in our country without fear of oppression, execution, or persecution. Let's keep America free. Let's keep our eyes open, though, to the movement, to this dark movement that's in our world, this terroristic group that wants to hurt Christian people, and they want to hurt other religious people. They hurt themselves, they hurt others. Let's keep our eyes open to that. We cannot elect shallow politicians. We cannot have people in Washington, D.C. that do not have any backbone to stand up to these terroristic groups in our country. People must stand up. We must be willing to fight. And we must have our eyes open to protect our country against any kind of extremism like that. Keeping our freedom means protecting our country from any type of extremism that's going to come in and try to devour, hurt, stamp out, oppress, hurt, execute just the good people of the country, the good Christian people, or the other good religious people. There are great other people in this country who are not Christians, but they do have other religious views. And America must have the freedom to have different religious views. That's what America is about, freedom of religion, separation of church and state. But we must be aware of any kind of view that would oppress and try to hurt other people because we do not accept that view or because we do not believe in that view. Let's be aware of that and keep our freedom in our country. Folks, we're beyond time for a new tax code in the United States. We need to cut the Internal Revenue Service in half. We have so many people working there that they don't even know what each other's doing. We are bogged down in the Internal Revenue Service of America. We could ratify, change, edit our tax reports, our tax filings, cut it down to one page, simplify the tax code, make it to where we just have to submit 1 or 2 pages when we file our taxes. I mean, it's ridiculous that people in the United States have to hire a CPA or H&R Block to help them do their taxes. We need to simplify the tax code in our country. Let's just say if a person makes $50,000, you pay 10% or no more than 12% of income tax to the IRS, and then you're done with it. You fill out your report, you send it in, and you're done. Here's a person making $100,000 a year, maybe 15%. A person making $500,000 a year, 20%. But let's simplify the tax code. Let's cut out and eliminate all of these long pages, these long filings that we're having to submit. For people making under $30,000 a year, or really for a family making under $40,000 a year, let's eliminate taxes. A family of 4 making $35,000 to $40,000 a year, they really can't afford to hardly take care of themselves. They shouldn't have to pay any tax. Let's keep the taxes simple. 10%, 15%, a maximum of 20% on people who make high incomes. Simplify the taxes, cut back on taxes, cut back on government, cut back on waste, cut back on all the money that we're wasting and throwing away in the Middle East, trillions of dollars in the Middle East, billions of dollars on foreign aid, money that we're throwing away constantly. Let's cut back on the size of government, cut back on our spending, take our money and use it where we need it. Use our money to help our seniors, to shore up our Social Security. Take some of this money and strengthen our military so that we can have a strong military in our country. Utilize some of this money in places where we need it here in our country to take care of people who are disabled and who are sick. Let's quit throwing our money all away around the world. Let's utilize it at home. And at the same time, we can cut back on our taxes, simplify the tax code, and make life a lot more pleasant in our country. Give people more money to spend. People will have more money in their pockets, more money to go to the grocery store. They'll have more money to buy a car, more money to buy a house, more money to take care of their children, more money for college education. Cut back on all this excessive taxation in our country. Cut back on that, give people more money to spend, simplify the tax code, and make America free and a greater place to live. It's time to bring our jobs back to the United States. If we're going to have freedom in our country, then we have to have jobs and income. We have to bring back the prosperity to our country. Prosperity has gone to other places. We hear about China, we hear about India, we hear about Mexico. And I'm not saying that the United States is down and out. We're certainly, truly a very blessed country. But all over our country, we hear about despair. We hear about people who can't find a job. We hear about people who can't afford a house, people who can't afford to buy a car, people who are living in poverty. What kind of a country that has 50 or 60 million people living in poverty? Folks, we need to bring back the jobs from other countries. Our jobs have gone south. Our jobs have gone to the east. Our jobs have gone north. They've gone everywhere. It's time to bring the economy, it's time to bring the prosperity back to America. Don't you get sick and tired of hearing about how well China's doing? Don't you get sick and tired of hearing about how well India is doing? Don't you get tired of hearing about jobs moving to Mexico? Folks, let's bring these jobs back. We need jobs here in the United States of America. People here in our country need jobs. Oh, it's wonderful that we have a lot of jobs in America, but where are these jobs? They're $8 an hour jobs, $9 an hour jobs. And I realize that some of these $9 and $10, $11 an hour jobs, maybe that they are suited for those types of businesses. People in those kinds of businesses, maybe that's all they can pay, and they hire people to work 10 or 15 hours a week. And those people are really happy to be making $10 or $11 an hour. They may be college students, or they may be retirees who need just something to do and a little bit of income. And so there's lots of places for those kind of jobs in our country. It's going to be very difficult to really get rich on an $11 or $12 an hour job, or even a $15 an hour job. Some folks think that making $15 an hour, that's just the answer to prosperity and wealth. You're not going to be rich making $15 an hour. There's a place in our country for $10, $11, $12, $15 an hour jobs. There is a place for that. But there's also a place in our country for the jobs to come back home. I remember well when people used to go to Detroit, Michigan, or Columbus, Ohio, or Dayton, Ohio, or Pittsburgh, and places throughout our country. And they would go there, get a job, and make enough income to buy a house and buy a car and raise their children and send their kids to college. Now today we just hear about certain pockets in our country where there are well-paying jobs. It's time to bring manufacturing back to the United States. We need to make our cars here. We need to make our furniture here. We need to make our lamps here. We need to build here. We need to make things here in the United States. Our electronics, we need to bring them home. We need to make our televisions and our refrigerators. We need to make our stoves, our appliances here in the United States. We need to bring manufacturing and prosperity back to this country, and we can do it. Corporations need to get a break on their taxes. Instead of paying 35% or more on their taxes, we need to cut that back to 15%. Have a corporate tax rate of 15% so that these corporations have money to expand, pay their employees more, and have an incentive to stay here in the United States. Let's bring the jobs back to America. Let's bring prosperity back to America. We're going to lose our freedom if we don't have any jobs. We're going to lose our freedom if we do not have an income in this nation and we're dependent on the government or somebody else to take care of us. Americans need to be independent people who have the ability to take care of themselves and feed themselves by having respectable jobs that pay them enough money to where they can raise their families. If we're going to keep our freedom in the United States, we have to stop being slaves to the government. Have you ever thought about that? that the majority of Americans more and more are becoming slaves to the United States government. We work and we live for the government. We pay our taxes to the government, then we look to the government for Medicare, and we look to the government for Medicaid, or we look to the government for our Social Security. We look to the government for our medical insurance. We look to the government to do this, to do that, to do everything. And it's almost like we're slaves to the United States government. Folks, listen, we need to be more independent in our country. I realize today that we couldn't make it without our United States military protecting us, and all of the government persons who serve us, such as our police persons and our fire department and those who serve in different governmental positions. And I'm definitely not anti-government. I'm grateful for the United States of America, and I'm grateful for all that this country provides for us. But we're not to bow down on our knees and worship the holy God of government. We must have independence in this country, and a part of our independence is employing and having jobs of manufacturing and jobs of business and jobs where we're working and selling among ourselves and other countries, and jobs where we can buy our own medical insurance. And one of the ways that we can solve this medical insurance crisis is to be able to buy across state lines. For a person in Texas to be able to buy medical insurance from someone in California or someone from New York. And that would make medical insurance competitive to where we could be able to afford it. And we need to cut back on the cost of hospitalization and the cost of prescriptions. I tell you, our pharmaceutical companies have gone crazy in what they're charging citizens of the United States. It costs almost a king's ransom to buy a prescription from a pharmacy. What's going to happen? Well, the point in time is going to come where we're going to have to deregulate our prescriptions and our pharmaceutical sales, and people are going to be able to buy from Canada or good old Mexico. Can you imagine ordering or getting your prescription from Tijuana or from Cancun, or getting your prescription from Canada? I'd be perfectly comfortable getting my prescriptions from Canada. But that's what's going to happen. That's eventually, one of these days, it's going to be deregulated, and the pharmaceutical companies are going to say, oh, all this money is going outside the country, all this money is going outside the country. Well, the pharmaceutical companies and those who are in charge of what's going on in our hospitals and healthcare costs today need to stand up and take notice that that day and time could come when a lot of our costs and a lot of our expenses could start going outside of our country, and that could have a tremendous impact upon America today. Why don't you, as pharmaceutical companies, begin to make prescription drugs more affordable today? Stop robbing the American people. Stop robbing the medical insurance companies. Those of you who are in positions in the hospitals, the CEOs and the hospital boards, quit robbing the American people. Stop charging so much for health care. You're bankrupting the American people. You're bankrupting the medical insurance companies of America. You need to begin to cut some costs. This would enable us as Americans to have greater freedom. Freedom means being able to afford to go to the doctor, freedom to go to the grocery store, freedom to buy a prescription, freedom to be able to take care of ourselves. And many Americans have gotten to the point and place in their lives where they can no longer take care of themselves. They can't provide for their medicine. They can't provide for their medical care. They can't afford to feed themselves. And so what do? They have to look to Big Brother. They have to look to the government. They have to look to Medicare. They have to look to Medicaid. And the government is just getting deeper and deeper and deeper, more trillions of dollars and more trillions of dollars in debt. Folks, it has to stop. And one of the ways it could stop is for us to begin to cut some of these costs. Hospitals and boards and staffs and those who are CEOs and those who are in charge need to begin to look at ways that they can cut costs. And the pharmaceutical companies, they need to begin to look at ways that they can cut some of their costs. And it needs to trickle down to the American people and make it possible for the American people to be able to afford to go to the hospital, to the doctor, or to pick up a prescription drug. And we need to alleviate some of this dramatic pressure that's being placed on government today. We just pass the bill on to the government. We say, here's a bigger Medicare bill, here's a bigger Medicaid bill, here's a bigger hospital bill, here government, you pay it. And the government is going to throw up their hands, and already right now they're saying, no, we can't pay all that. We can't pay all that. We can't pay that much. And so there has to be an editing. There has to be some change in America today so that Americans can become more financially independent, not having to rely upon the government for our food and for our sustenance and for every dollar that comes our way. Let's keep America free. Let's get back to the day where Americans could afford to go to the doctor, where Americans could afford to buy a prescription, where Americans could actually take care of themselves and not have to be dependent upon the government for everything. When I go to the polls to vote, I always show my driver's license, sign in that I'm voting. I don't have any problem with that. Do you have a problem with that? A problem with showing your driver's license or your government ID or some kind of voter identification? I don't understand why people in our country, anybody, would have a problem with that. Unless you're illegal, or unless you're trying to hide something, or unless you're trying to pull something on the people at the voting polls. Friends, let's make that something that is essential. Keep it essential in our country. Show your ID, show your voter registration card, whatever form of identification your county or state government requires. That is very vital in keeping America secure. We don't want a busload of people pulling up at the polls and all of them getting off and saying, oh, we left our driver's license at the house, we left our voter registration card, we left that back in Mexico. No, I'm sorry, our voter registration card is over in Syria. We left it over there. Can you just go ahead and let us vote? Friends, we cannot have an indifferent, apathetic attitude when it comes to voting in our country. Let's make that a lifelong national priority for every state and every place for voter identifications, voter registration to occur, and for people to identify themselves when they show up at the polls to vote. I am so glad the White House, right over my shoulder here where the President of the United States and his family live, I am so glad that we do everything that we can to keep them safe. They deserve to be protected and kept safe. And I've been all around the White House, walked around it, and I know there's lots of security around the White House. Not only is there a fence that people have climbed over before in the past, so we have heard, but there's lots of people around the White House and around the fence, police cars, and they have weapons. They're carrying guns. There's people on the White House grounds, and there's people walking around on the roof of the White House, and they have high-powered rifles, and they have scopes, and they are surveying the area, protecting their president, protecting our president. And folks, we must keep our president and his family safe. Regardless who lives in that White House, we must keep our elected government officials, such as our president and our vice president and our leaders such as this, we must keep them safe. And I am all for all kinds of people swarming around that White House with guns to protect them. But where I live, I don't have Secret Service. I do not have guards standing outside of my house. I do not have police cars driving around my house, and I do not have massive amounts of security. The only security I have is my 357 on my lampstand, or my 45, or my shotgun, and they are loaded, and that's the security that I have. And my wife has access to guns and knows how to shoot a gun very well. And that is our protection. And American people, the average American person, does not have security forces walking around the house taking care of their house. What happens if our government takes away our guns? We're not allowed to have a gun. Don't you know that criminals can get guns? We've made drugs, by and large, illegal here in the United States. Do those who break the law, do they have any trouble getting drugs? They don't have trouble buying drugs. No, there's drugs on the street, and they're shipping drugs in here from Mexico as fast as they can sell them. And people are buying them and taking them. There's drugs all over the United States. Making them illegal has not stopped the spreading of illegal drugs here in our country. If we make guns illegal in our country, do you think that's going to stop guns being sold in our country? No. Mexico will just have a great new source of revenue. They'll start getting guns and selling them to people here undercover in the United States, and criminals will buy them. Criminals buy illegal drugs, and criminals will buy illegal guns.